Hello there, faithful listener. You've tuned in to Season 7 of the Bible Explained podcast. So make sure to grab your cup of coffee, because today we are going to be discussing the book of 2 Samuel. Hey there, faithful listeners. Welcome to the Bible Explained. I told you earlier this week that I had gotten sick last week and that it was like the easiest sickness I ever had. And it was like gone in one day. Well, that was a lie, because on Sunday I was so sick. Oh my goodness. I had such a sore throat. I could barely talk. So thank God I had Monday's and Tuesday's episode actually already done, which is very rare for me to be ahead a few days. Usually I'm only ahead one day, if I'm even ahead at all. So I had 2 episodes done, so I was able to kind of relax on Sunday. So Monday I started feeling a little better, and I was able to record another episode of discussions with my sister. And I was also able to record another podcast episode or 2. So I'm thankful that I'm feeling a little bit better. Hope you guys are staying well and are not sick right now. But let's read 2 Samuel 17, verses 1 through 16 today. This is the story of the beginning of the fall of Absalom. It looked like he was going to succeed. It looked like he was going to be the next king of Israel. But suddenly, things start happening that cause him to fall. So let's talk about that. I'll be reading out of the WEB as always. Grab your cup of coffee or tea this morning, and let's give reverence to God's word together. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me now choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David tonight. I will come on him while he is weary and exhausted, and I will make him afraid. All the people who are with him will flee. I will strike the king only, and I will bring back all the people to you. The man whom you seek is as if all returned. All the people shall be in peace." The saying pleased Absalom well, and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let's hear likewise what he says." Then Hushai had come to Absalom. Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahithophel has spoken like this. Shall we do what he says? If not, speak up." Hushai said to Absalom, "The counsel that Ahithophel has given at this time is not good." Hushai said, "Moreover, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are fierce in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Your father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is now hidden in some pit, or in some other place. It will happen when some of them have fallen at the first, that whoever hears it will say, 'There is a slaughter among the people who follow after Absalom.' Even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt. For all of Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. But I counsel that all of Israel be gathered together to you, from Dan even to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea for multitude, and that you go into battle in your own person. So we will come on him in some place where he will be found, and we will light on him as the dew falls on the ground. Then we will not so much as leave one of him and all the men who are with him. Moreover, if he has gone into a city, then all of Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river until there isn't one small stone found there." Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel." For Yahweh had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, to the intent that Yahweh might bring evil on Absalom. Then Hushai said to Zadok and to Abiathar the priests, "Ahithophel counseled Absalom and all the elders of Israel that way, and I have counseled this way. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, 'Don't lodge tonight in the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king be swallowed up, and all the people who are with him.'" So you remember in the last chapter that Absalom, David's son, had just made himself king of Israel. And for the most part, all of the Israelites were on board with this. They really liked Absalom, and they started rejecting King David, even though David was still the king. So after David found out that everybody loved Absalom and Absalom was staging a rebellion against him, David and his entire household fled Jerusalem, because they knew that they were in serious danger. So David and all these people who were with him were traveling along and trying to find friends, but a lot of people completely betrayed David. For example, Ahithophel, who is mentioned here, Ahithophel was one of David's counselors, And he was a very, very smart man. Like, this guy was intelligent. And David knew this. So when he found out that Ahithophel was now serving Absalom, David got very scared because he's like, Ahithophel gives extremely good advice. I have never had a problem with Ahithophel's advice. So David prayed to God that Ahithophel would suddenly start giving bad advice instead of good advice like he always had. But meanwhile, Absalom, who made this grand entrance into Jerusalem, he was positioning himself as the next king. And Ahithophel gave Absalom some very bad advice, actually, to take all of his father's concubines and have sex with them openly in front of all of Israel so that all of Israel, or rather all of Jerusalem, could see what he was doing. Okay, so Absalom was like, great idea. So he pitched this tent on the top of King David's house and was continually bringing in like a revolving door concubines that David had left in his house. And the reason Ahithophel counseled Absalom to do this was it would make Absalom look large and in charge, as if he was literally the next king of Israel and he had just taken everything that his father had. Now, it ended up being terrible advice because it was against God. God made it very clear in the Old Testament laws that a son was never supposed to sleep with his father's wives. And so this was bad advice because it was against God. But after all of this takes place, it seems as if Absalom is in fact the next king. So it kind of looks like Absalom and all of the people who were on Absalom's side were starting to get kind of arrogant. They were starting to truly think that their plans were beginning to work. So Ahithophel gives some more advice to Absalom. Here's what he says. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom in verse 1, "Let me now choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David tonight. I will come on him while he is weary and exhausted, and I will make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike the king only, and I will bring back all the people to you. The man whom you seek is as if all returned. All the people shall be in peace." So this was a good idea, because what Ahithophel is getting at is 1,000 people from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, totaling 12,000 people, would go and pursue after David. And when they finally found where David was, they would kill David only and then take all the rest of the people that were with David back into the city of Jerusalem, and literally no one would die except for King David. And this would ease tensions. This wouldn't cause a civil war between David's followers and Absalom's followers. This would just be a simple, peaceful way to target David and to secure the throne once and for all for Absalom. And really, it was great advice what Ahithophel gave here, because David truly was tired. He truly was depressed and discouraged. He was letting people curse him and throw rocks at him, as we saw in the last chapter. Like he had given up in a way. So this probably would have worked had Absalom followed this advice. And everyone knew that this was good advice. It says in verse 4 that the saying pleased Absalom well, along with all the elders of Israel. And Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let's hear likewise what he has to say." So this was a good idea. And even Absalom thought it was a good idea. And all the elders of Israel that were on Absalom's side also believed that this plan was great. But the reason Absalom wanted to hear another point of view was because I think Ahithophel made two mistakes when presenting this plan to Absalom. The first mistake he made was that Ahithophel himself would lead the charge. This means that Absalom wouldn't look like a warrior. He wouldn't look powerful to the people. And as we know, Absalom was a very vain person. He really liked keeping up with appearances. He was extremely handsome. He was charming, and he really cared about what the people thought of him. So I think it was uninteresting to him that he wouldn't be included in this plan, and Ahithophel would be leading the charge against his own father. So that's the first mistake I think, that Ahithophel made here. But the second mistake that Ahithophel made was that he called David the king. Verse 2, Ahithophel says, I will come in on him while he is weary and exhausted, and I will make him afraid. All the people who are with him will flee. I will strike the king only. And I'm sure Absalom did not like hearing that David was still the king. This was a slip of the tongue on the part of Ahithophel. Oops. So that's probably why Absalom decides to hear what Hushai has to say. Now, Hushai, as we know, was also a counselor to David, similarly like Ahithophel was, except Hushai was still loyal to David. And the only reason Hushai was with Absalom at this point was because he was going to be a spy for David. He was still loyal to David, and he was also going to try to counteract some of Ahithophel's good advice by giving bad advice. So in verse 6, when Hushai had come to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken like this. Shall we do what he says? If not, speak up. Hushai says to Absalom, the counsel that Ahithophel has given at this time is not good. This shows also, by the way, that Hushai was not just an excellent counselor, but he was also extremely smart. Because Hushai had to think up something on the fly that he could give to Absalom that would sound like great advice, and also that would make Ahithophel's advice look bad. So Hushai was an extremely intelligent person. Hushai said, moreover, you know that your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are fierce in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Your father is a man of war, and he will not lodge with the people. Notice here that he does not call David the king once, like Ahithophel had done earlier. Hushai was choosing his words here very, very carefully. The only thing he calls David is Absalom's father. Behold, he is now hidden in some pit or some other place. It will happen when some of them have fallen at the first, that whoever hears it will say, there is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. So Hushai is stating that the reason that Ahithophel's advice is bad is because David is like a warrior, which is very true. David was like a warrior. But during this time of David's life, he was very far from being a warrior. Like I said, he had kind of given up in the last chapter, and he was very tired and very weary and discouraged and disappointed and depressed and so many other things. And Hushai knew this, but he's reminding Absalom of what David used to be like, because David used to be a huge and great warrior. So he's saying to Absalom, your father has a great reputation as being a warrior, and this is going to make those 12,000 men that Ahithophel wants to bring into battle, David's reputation precedes him, and these 12,000 men, they're going to be afraid. And David is probably hiding in some pit all by himself, away from his soldiers. So he's probably not even with his soldiers, if you're even able to find his soldiers. David's probably not even there. He's too smart for that. He's got a warrior's mind. And so what's going to happen is if, Ahithophel leads these 12,000 men up to where David is, many of them are going to die right at the get-go because of how strong David's soldiers are, and David's not even going to be there. So then when the rest of the 12,000 hear that many of their people have died on the battlefield, they're going to get discouraged and flee, and David is going to win this battle, and then you're going to look weak, is what he says to Absalom. So he says, instead of doing what Ahithophel recommends, here's what I propose. Verse 11, I counsel that all of Israel be gathered together to you, from Dan even to Beersheba. So not just 12,000 men, Absalom, but all the fighting men of Israel. We're going to wage a huge war against David, is what he says. As the sand that is by the sea for multitude, and you go into battle with your own person. So this was a great plan that Hushai had, because he's appealing to what he knows Absalom is. He's appealing to Absalom's vanity. He's saying, Absalom, don't you want a part of this plan? Don't you think you should lead a grand battle against your father? I mean, you're the new king, Absalom, so shouldn't you be a part of this plan? He says, so we will come on him in some place where he will be found, and we will light on him as the dew falls on the ground, and we will not leave so much as one of him and all of the men who are with him. So we kill everybody, David and all of the men who are with David, and you're going to look so great doing this, Absalom. He says, even if David has gone into a city, all of Israel is going to bring ropes, and we're going to tie it around that city. And so now he's really cheesing it up here. He says, we're going to tie ropes around that city, and we'll pull that entire city down, and we'll put it in the river, and not a stone will be left of that city, and David and all of his men will die in that city. So Absalom hears the advice that Hushai gives, and he's like, man, that sounds really good. I get to look strong. I get to be a warrior just like my dad was. I'm going to look great to all of Israel. So he and all of the men of Israel, it doesn't say the elders of Israel, by the way. It says, Absalom and the men of Israel said, the counsel that Hushai the Archite gives is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. So it sounds like Absalom and his yes men and his friends who are with him all thought that Hushai's bad advice was better than Ahithophel's good advice. And the reason this happened was because Yahweh had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel to the intent that Yahweh might bring evil on Absalom. This proves that Absalom sleeping with his father's concubines in the last chapter was terrible advice because God has now rejected Absalom. He allowed Absalom to take bad advice instead of Ahithophel's good advice, so that evil would come to Absalom. So now Hushai, after buying David some time, because don't forget that Ahithophel's plan was to strike that very night and kill David. This would not have given anybody enough time to go find David wherever he was and warn him. But Hushai's plan would have bought David a lot more time because his plan was to get all of Israel together to wage a war against David. And that would have taken a lot of time to find all of the fighting men of Israel and gather them all together to go find David. So this gave David some time to get away from Absalom. So Hushai immediately goes to the two priests, Zadok and Abiathar, to tell them the news. So once again, Hushai is a spy for David. And actually, so is Zadok and Abiathar. They were also loyal to David. And they had two sons. Their sons were named Jonathan and Ahimaaz, who were also loyal to David. And Jonathan and Ahimaaz were the ones that were going to go and find David and tell all of the news to David. So in verse 15, it says that Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, Ahithophel counseled Absalom and the elders of Israel that way, and I have counseled them this way. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, don't lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king be swallowed up and all the people who are with him. So this gave David enough time to cross over the Jordan River, which probably took quite a bit of time with all of the people that he had and possibly all of the children that were with him as well. This gave David time to get away from Absalom in this huge battle and confrontation that was about to take place. So the moral of this story so far is Proverbs 16, verse 18, which says, pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. And Absalom, as we know, was very prideful, and he was very arrogant, and he thought very highly of himself. He thought of himself as a better king than his own father, and he was willing to kill his own father in order to get the throne from him. And so Hushai, who stroked Absalom's ego, made Absalom think that Hushai's advice was better than Ahithophel's advice. Because once again, Ahithophel's advice did not stroke Absalom's ego, and also Ahithophel made a slip of the tongue by calling David the king, which Absalom probably did not like very much. But because Absalom was so prideful, he was about to take bad advice, and he was about to fall, just like Proverbs 16:18 says. That's the first moral of the story. And the second moral is that God is the one who sets kings up, and he's the one who takes them down. God had not rejected King David, and he had not accepted Absalom as the next king. So through all of this, God was going to protect King David and establish King David's throne as he had promised to David so many years prior to this, and he was going to reject Absalom. So God is the one who protects people. He keeps them out of harm's way. And quite honestly, I think we saw evidence of that over the weekend. Well, guys, we'll talk more about 2 Samuel 17 on Friday. But actually, a new episode of Discussions just came out where my sister and I discuss a self-proclaimed prophet who apparently predicted back in March that Trump was going to have his right ear blown off by a bullet. So my sister and I discussed that and whether or not that is a real prophecy on the new episode of Discussions. But you can only access Discussions if you are a member on Ko-fi. So if you would like to become a member on Ko-fi and support this podcast, and you just enjoy the work that I'm doing over here on P40 Ministries and the Bible Explained, then go over to Ko-fi, check all of that out. You'll see that listed in the description of this episode. This podcast is only made possible due to the support of faithful listeners like you. But guys, I will see you all tomorrow for an episode from Romans. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless.